Shall I mention something about accessibility?
You can, sure.
Yeah, which is that I sort of learned this from the work that Emma Cliff did in Bath, because she did a lot of development work, and it was really difficult for her to disseminate her production environments to ordinary users, because there's so many sort of configuration variables and thises and that's, that the installation is quite difficult. That's what packaging is about, is trying to get all the reproducible results to work together. And the goal of, and to produce accessible outputs, you might need to revise the book or the outputs 6 months or 3 years down the line. Or maybe you don't even know how to create accessibility, but you want to archive it so that when you do, you can run the document exactly as it was before. And that's your starting point for getting accessible outputs. So in a certain sense, the goal of portable TeX documents is to provide all the benefits of packaging. But remember that Alice ate the apple. The apple was ate by Alice. Portable TeX documents are focused on the document. You don't want to archive the software. The software people do that. We're writing documents. We want to archive the documents. And when we archive the documents, we want to, along with that, archive the software that's needed, most of which in the TeX system is things called macro files, which are a bit like CSS and stuff like that. So they're plain text files. They're nothing complicated.
Thank you.
That's good. So I'm hoping that this will make TeX easier to use in collaboration. I've looked at Overleaf, and I've also came across something called Figma, which is a web development framework. And one of its big selling features is that it really simplifies online collaboration. And would you believe it? The need for online collaboration really exploded a year and a quarter, around March last year. The need for online collaboration really exploded. And that was really good for Figma. And Overleaf, one of its big strengths is the online collaboration it supports, because all the various problems about different versions are solved. They've solved the problem of identical results across space, time, and architectures. But the way they do it is they have a big centralized thing, and you have to go to that. Whereas the way I do it is much more decentralized and what's called peer-to-peer. Git is peer-to-peer in the sense that there's no master anywhere. Each repository is the same as any other in terms of its intrinsic status. And that gives an enormous flexibility and power. It means, in particular, Nelson, that there's much less ability to lock people in because, well, for example, the Linux kernel server got hacked. And whilst it was being restored, they just switched the development to GitHub and used the GitHub Linux kernel repository. And the disruption was minimal. How are we for that? So
I have a question for you about Overleaf.
Sure.
Let's say that a university wishes to convert some type of STEM educational material into an accessible format like LaTeX. And you use an automated tool like Empty Reader, for example.
Yeah.
And it does everything automatically, but not with 100% accuracy. With Overleaf, you could see the LaTeX before it's compiled and after it's compiled. But the individual that's preparing the accessible format is not a mathematician. They would not know how to manually change the text in the LaTeX pre-compiled section of Overleaf to the right thing to get the right output. Does Overleaf lend itself to collaboration in that way, where an expert in mathematics can review a converted paper document and make the necessary changes in LaTeX? I guess I'm asking more about the functionality of Overleaf. But
okay, let me come back on that. So you said enough for me to get the question, and I'm going to ask the question you asked, and then the question I wish you'd asked. So the question you asked is, does Overleaf support line by line, formula by formula collaboration? And the answer is not really, as far as I know. It's more keeping the current document. What GitHub does is it allows for line by line editing of code. So quite common in programming is what's called the code review. Somebody submits new code or changes to code, and somebody will then read that code, and line by line they can make comments on the code. And Git is also very good for making small fragmentary changes. So using Git in the right way, such sorts of changes could be made. Such sort of monitoring could be done.
But can you see the compiled version of the code when you're using GitHub and modifying lines? Because that's critical. You have to see how it's going to render.
No, that's not Overleaf. That's a big problem in the LaTeX system, which is that it compiles whole documents at a time. It doesn't do it a paragraph at a time or a formula at a time. Whereas, for example, if you're using MathJax encoded mathematics, it's a formula at a time. And so you do have that capability, and you can build it into a web page. So what you're asking for is a particular capability. Now, Overleaf, more or less, only has the capabilities that are standard to LaTeX. And then it doesn't have all of them, because it's a server setting. And I spoke about security. If there's some whiz-bang package that has got security issues in it, Overleaf won't run it, because they have these big installations, 5 gigabytes each, and they can't mess with them. And because they can't mess with them, it's very difficult for them to run in containers, which is the normal way you handle that sort of problem. So that's the situation, I think, with what you were saying. And that relates to a serious problem with Overleaf, which is always a bit behind the times. And that doesn't bother Overleaf, but it bothers people who innovate, because it means that they're cut off from many people.
Are there any tools that enable you to have 2 windows? One window shows the LaTeX, the other window shows the LaTeX compiled. And as you change a line of the LaTeX, immediately and automatically, the view of the output is recompiled?
With modern machines, that can be done if the document isn't too big. And I don't know exactly how large too big is. I think what you've got here is a really important question, and it's all about the user experience, really.
Yes.
and